exercise some kinetic energy and come out. Good to see y'all. We're live? Good. We are in Revelation chapter 16. We're going to be picking up from where we left off yesterday. We'll be picking up on the fourth and fifth judgments today, and then building a case for God's righteousness to open the temple up and show himself to be King of Kings and Lord of Lords. We're going to be looking at a number of the Old Testament scriptures to help actually give us a keener sense, if you will, of God's controversy with humanity in a particular context here. If I were to ask the question, what people on the planet would be most keenly aware of the manner in which God is speaking in the book of the Revelation of Jesus Christ? What people on the planet would be deeply and keenly aware that the language and the genre and all of this metaphorical stuff and the symbolism and typology and the use of the terms that we're dealing with in the book of the Revelation, what people group on the planet would be most familiar with the God that is actually exhibiting these attributes? That's a good question for you to begin to pose. What people would feel most pressured by the apocalypse? What people on the planet would feel like the apocalypse is like a mirror and an indictment in many ways? What people on the planet would really struggle with the book of the Revelation, even so much so that they would basically deny the authorial nature of the New Testament, particularly the book of the Revelation. And then, because if they are keenly aware of the relationship between the book of the Apocalypse, the Revelation, and the epistles, they would also be inclined to want to reject the epistles as well, because your epistles from the book of Acts all the way through the end of 3rd John is a seamless commentary on the book of the Revelation as well. When you actually lay the book of the Revelation over the top of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the gospel, the book of Acts, and the narrative dynamic of the apostles over against the Jewish church, and they're spread out into the Gentile world. And then you take Romans and go from Romans all the way to the book of Jude. What people reading the New Testament, that's another way to put it, would be most apprehended, most concerned, most indicted for the clarity of that new covenant, New Testament language and its utter indictment against the people who are most responsible for the blessings that God has given unto them in relationship to how God is revealing himself in that book. I raised that question 2 or 3 times because I want you to be able to answer that accurately, and then be able to make the application as well. We're going to unpack that as we go through our class tonight. But you should know, many of you who have been under my teaching for years, you should know the categories. You should know the protagonist in these studies. You should know the antagonist in these studies. You should know the objects of God's favor and the objects of God's wrath. You should know that God has been exercising imminent, godlike patience. And he always does before he ultimately pours out his justice and judgment. And even in his justice and judgment, he has been measured for a long time. And now that we're in the bowl judgments, the vial judgments, you are seeing a greater measure of God's wrath, as the language is given. And yet it's not in its full unmitigated demonstration. That is not written. It's not written that way. What will be the ultimate expression of God's wrath is not written out in any kind of measured metric language. It's only given in one term, the lake of fire. But prior to that, all of this other language that we're exercising ourselves on, there is one people group in the world and probably just a category of them, quite frankly, who are keenly and eminently and conscientiously aware of who it is that God is pouring his wrath out on. Because they've experienced this over and over and over and over again in the most minutest details that they could actually explain every event, every method that God employed to discipline them and to call them back and to reprove them, and then finally to judge them and to scatter them and to recover them. There's one people group that would know the book of the Apocalypse profoundly well, and then its application to you and I obviously would be the thing that we would want to try to at least discover to some degree, so that the book could apply to us too, at least in terms of how God will ultimately intervene on the last day and deal with our world. Let me open in a word of prayer, and then we're going to just start putting the puzzle pieces together, and we'll be working through the fourth, and we'll touch on the fifth vile judgment or bold judgment, and then Friday we'll deal with 6 and 7, which is a remarkable event as well in Revelation 16. Father, thank you for your mercy and kindness. Thank you for those who are watching online. Thank you for those who are in class with us tonight. In this brief time that we have with you, we're asking that you open our hearts and open our minds. Open our hearts and open our minds to hear your word and to benefit from what you say and what you're doing, so that we can have a knowledge of you through your word, which you have told us is eternal life, as it is summed up in the person of your Son, the only grounds of our acceptance before you and the only grounds upon which we can approach your holiness is through your Son, Jesus Christ. So we're asking, Lord, that you would help us to transcend the mere bodily exercise of physical hearing, and to hear with the heart of faith, to hear with the ear of obedience, to hear with the spirit of humility. Open our eyes that we may behold wonderful things out of your law. Grant us the perseverance to study sound doctrine in a way that it will transform us into the image of Christ, and give us the discernment that we need in this generation, since we are beginning to see a recapitulation of your same kind of judgments of old taking place in our land, as you are bringing about darkness and blindness and consequences to the rebellion of humanity, to against all of the overtures of your goodness and your faithfulness to mankind here in the 21st century. Again, we ask your mercy upon our families, relatives, and friends who are struggling or challenged, are going through a multiple of difficulties. Use it all, O Lord, to bring them to you. That's the ultimate purpose for which you are allowing us to breathe in and out, to ultimately confess you as our Heavenly Father, Jesus as our Lord, and the Spirit of God, the resident landlord of our soul. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. I'm in Revelation chapter 16. I'm just going to read again in Revelation 16, verse 8 and 9, and then I'm going to just start building on some things we talked about before, because I want us to get the point a little bit more fully about what are these bold judgments about. The fourth angel in verse 8 is what John now declares. The fourth angel poured out his vial upon the sun, and power was given unto him to scorch men with fire. And men were scorched with great heat, and they blasphemed the name of God, which had power over these plagues, and they repented not to give him glory. If you look carefully at the language, we talked about this yesterday, you see these angels. We're on the fourth angel, and each angel has a vial. If you look carefully at the language, what the angel is doing is pouring their vials upon the earth. They're not pouring them upon the people, they're pouring them upon the earth. And you see a parallelism between what they do here in Revelation 16 under the vile judgments as to what they did in Revelation chapter 8 and 9 under the bold judgments, and that symmetry is something I want us to capture. There are some subtle differences between the trumpet judgments and the bold judgments. I'll talk about them as we deal with it. But the way I want to conclude is that the bowl judgments and trumpet judgments in chapter 8 and 9, bowl judgments in 16, are two sides of the same coin. I want you to think that through. Two sides of the same coin, only in the bowl judgments it's expanded. It's two sides of the same coin, only in the bowl judgments it's expanded, and it's expanded because when the judgments of the trumpets were laid out, it was dealing with God's enemies at a particular time under a particular context, of which when we advance through the book of the Revelation into chapter 11, 12, and 13, the people of the enemies of God have responded in a much more hostile and particular way, for which God now opens up these same judgments in a much more severe and a much more all-encompassing capacity. I basically helped you understand the categories of these antagonists of God under two terms. One is the earth dwellers. Earth dwellers. That's the first term that was used in reference to God's response to the worldlings, the enemies of God who have troubled God's people. They are first called earth dwellers. I gave you that language, Revelation 6:10. Pull it up. I just want to make sure. Remember, I told you what I wanted to do with you in the book of the Revelation was to make you comfortable with the book, just as comfortable with the book of the Apocalypse as you would be with Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, or the epistles. And the way you get comfortable with it, that's not an emotional, I'm not talking psychologically, I'm talking about comfortable intellectually, comfortable with your being able to negotiate the book, know terms, and kind of follow the narrative. Most people don't spend enough time in the book of the Revelation to get comfortable with it. I want you to be comfortable with it. Like if I were to say to you, who are the enemies in the book of the Revelation? You should at least be able to say they are the earth dwellers. Then you can expand on that, because the term earth dweller has several meanings underneath, but certainly they are the earth dwellers. Listen to how, again, the souls under the altar express it. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, "How long, O Lord, holy and true, do you not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth?" So as soon as we establish that particular nomenclature, that phraseology, that terminology, now we can be sensitive to its use all the way through the book of the Revelation, because it will be used again and again, because God does not want his people to be confused with him making a distinction, as we learned yesterday, between those he is punishing and those he is what? Protecting. That dichotomy is consistent all the way through the book, and it allows the reader of the book of the Revelation to know how God works and why God works. And so the first category here we recognize are earth dwellers. You will see that consistently across the board. You will see the beast come up out of the earth. The beast will come up out of the earth. He comes from the bottomless pit, but he comes up out of the earth. That's what we see in Revelation chapter 13, verse 11. And I saw a second beast coming up out of the what? Earth. A second beast coming up out of the earth. That's Revelation 13, verse 11. I beheld another beast coming up out of the what? Do you see it? Out of the what? Right. And that for me would give me a little clue that there may be a correlation between the parties that are described as earthlings who may have some substantial relationship to this second beast, because they're both coming from the same place. This is how you read the scriptures carefully and finally develop the identity of the parties in view. That's the first group. I would call them earth dwellers. But now here with Revelation chapter 13, what we're dealing with now is an advancement of the earth dwellers' attack upon the people of God for whom Christ has died, who are bearing record to the wisdom and power of God through the gospel, and they're being met with opposition by the earth dwellers and being killed. So now in Revelation chapter 13, what do we know? This beast coming up out of the earth now is going to impress upon the whole world a need to worship the first beast, the beast of the sea. And he's going to employ signs and wonders to deceive people into doing it. You guys do know that, right? And then he's going to employ political power of the sword that mandates that if you don't worship the first beast, for whom I am here representing, you will be killed. And then he will employ a methodology by which those who worship the first beast will have an opportunity to engage in the replication of the first beast by image worship, by image replication. That's what you get in Revelation chapter 13, verse 14 and 15. You guys saw it before. Revelation 13, 14, he deceives them that dwell on the earth by those means of miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that where dwell on the earth, that they should make an image to the beast. I would raise that up because I'm going to help you understand tonight that this terminology also is not new. This is old terminology of which, as I stated before, the people that actually know deeply and intimately who the Spirit of God is talking about here have been through this prohibition before and have collapsed up under this temptation before. That's what you're going to see tonight. And this is the benefit you get from precept upon precept, line upon line, here a little, there a little. So you got politics and religion working false signs and wonders, imposing upon the people a deceptive working that leads them to engage in worshiping the state and then replicating the image of that beast, right? They are now engaged in what we learned on Sunday is called what? Idol worship. It makes sense then in the trumpet judgments and in the bowl judgments that when God is pouring out his wrath, he says unto them, and they repented not of their idolatries or their sorceries or their fornications or their adulteries. These are the people, aren't they? It's consistent across the board. So I'm trying to help you actually see who the characters are in the movie. Only in this context, now the enemy, this demonic duo, working behind the power of Satan, which therefore is the unholy what? Trinity, is forcing people to engage in a kind of neo-evangelism by replicating the image of the one who was wounded and healed, which is a pseudo-gospel type, right? Because Jesus is the one we know who was crucified, who was wounded, and who was healed, and we are to replicate him in the what? Ministry of the gospel. This is what God wants his elect to be able to see, that there's a false church and a true church. There's a false religion and a true religion. There's a false God and a true God. And that dichotomy must be kept clear in your understanding, because this is where you and I get discernment. This is how you get discernment on what's going on in our world. So, verse 15 gives us one more bit of information. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many that would not worship him, that they should be what? Right, and the ones who did not worship him and were killed are called who? They're called the elect. They're the lambs. They're the elect. Right, it's important for you to know. We're going to do two things here. I'm going to describe them as the elect, and I'm going to write one more term, true Israel. The true Israel. Here we're going to talk about the punishment of, and I want you to capture this, it's called the Egypto, I'm going to write a term, the Egypto Sodomites. The Egypto Sodomites. I want you to get that term, the Egypto Sodomites. I'm not being arbitrary. You know I'm not being arbitrary. I'm just taking my time to help you catch these categories. I'm going to prove it through the Bible. That the punishment of the Egypto Sodomites and the protection of the elect true Israel is the narrative of the Old Testament scriptures, making its way all the way into the book of the Revelation as a code for the true believer to understand how God's controversy with the earthlings have been going on for thousands of years. And what did we do yesterday? We recognized that dealing with the boils, blood, scorches, etc., we are dealing with a what? An Exodus motif, right? So we now know that the Exodus event first started off with the 10 plagues, right? So that's what we're dealing with right now as an exercise of spiritual faith. The 10 plagues are being executed in the book of the Revelation in the same way the 10 plagues were being executed upon Pharaoh and his nation and army in order to deliver national Israel. So we'll get a chance to look at that narrative a little bit more fully. What I want to do now is call your attention to something that's critical to understand as we are putting together the categories, as we're putting together the category of the punishment of the Egypto-Sodomites and the protection of the elect true Israel. That term, Egypto-Sodomite, is not a new term given to us. That's Revelation chapter 11, verse 8, Revelation 11:8, in the book of Revelation. And then I'm going to remind you of something that I shared with you about how you will have to refer to 3 Old Testament prophets in order to actually understand the book of the Revelation. You cannot arbitrarily interpret the book of the Revelation, because the book of the Revelation is kind of like, it's like a text given to us in consummate whole, but it was piecemeal through 3 prophets. Daniel gave you a portion, Ezekiel gave you a portion, and Zechariah gave you a portion. By the time it showed up to the New Testament church, it's all one letter called the Apocalypse, okay? That's how that works. Now, Revelation 11:8 says, and their dead bodies, the 2 witnesses that they killed, the ones that won't bow to the beast, the ones that won't worship him, that won't receive his image or his mark or his name, they were killed in the street of the great city. What is that great city? What is that great city literally? Jerusalem. Now here's the term I want you to write down with it, because you got to get your categories right. This is earthly Jerusalem, ethnic Israel. Earthly Jerusalem, ethnic Israel. How do we know that? Because we have a clear dichotomy between the Israel which is above and the Israel that's on the earth, right? So we know that we got 2 kinds of Israel, 2 qualities of Israel. We can't just say Israel in general, because we might indict the wrong Israel. Like, if we know we've got a true church and a false church, we don't want to say the church in general, we want to be particular. So here we're talking about ethnic Israel and earthly Jerusalem being defined nominatively as Sodom and what? Egypt. Sodom and Egypt. So you're being told in the book of Revelation who it is that God is now identifying with the beast coming up out of the bottomless pit, making war against them. Look again at verse 5. Verse 5. Verse 7, well, I'll get past their work. Verse 7, 11, 7. And when they shall have finished their testimony, the 2 witnesses, the beast. This is the first time that you guys see in the book of the Revelation, the beast, the Therion. The first time the beast shows up is right here, okay? So you're going to see him all the way through the book of the Revelation, all the way up to Revelation 19:20, okay? In fact, all the way up, Revelation 19:20, I'll show you that tonight. But here's the first time he shows up. Here's the first time that term beast shows up. And how does he show up? In opposition against the 2 witnesses, doesn't he? He shows up in opposition against the 2 witnesses. And when they shall have finished their testimony, the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them and shall overcome them, and what? It's called a lamb's life. So that's the theme running through the book, because the 1st century church, and this is true all the way up to the 3rd century, was given the honorable task of spreading the gospel via suffering and death. This is where you and I have been doing a little bit of frequenting ourselves with the martyrs. I'll be giving you more stories along the lines with them. And the way the book of the Revelation and the whole Bible really culminates is a testament, a New Testament based on blood. And as some of the early church fathers put it, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. That the church really only spread because men and women were willing to suffer for the cause of the gospel, even if it meant death. And that's why I share it with you. By the time we get to the end of the chapter 13 in the book of Revelation, we got 7 million people floating around the Roman Empire because the gospel's spreading. Everywhere they kill believers, more people start believing the gospel. And that's how that history works out. So this kind of subtle tension in the book of the Revelation chapter 12, if you will, verse 11. That's the theme, right? And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto the death. We worked through that with the 7 promises given to the 7 churches, didn't we? That what Christ did was lay out to the church that if you are faithful unto death, you get these blessings. Well, it worked because many of them believed the gospel and suffered and died. You and I are reading the narrative in a comforting context. Maybe we will one day find ourselves meeting that level of persecution, maybe not, because that was not ordained for the whole church throughout the whole of church history. Church history does not have the believer always going through trouble. In fact, if we would use the principle of that which has been is, history is present, and that which will be, even that has already been, future is also past, the recapitulation principle. Here's what you can know. God has had a people on the planet that he has told them that they are his and they are to bear record with the world that they're his. And watch this. He's always blessed them. He's always blessed them. They have had a time where they have lived blessed, prospered, matured, and in many ways fulfilled Genesis 1:26 and 27, go ye into all the world, prosper, right? Replenish, subdue the earth. He did that with Adam and Eve. Ultimately, they flourished. He did that with Noah. Even after the flood, Noah, Shem, and Japheth, and Ham, they become the progenitors of the whole human race. He did it with Abraham and Sarah. Sarah's barren, Abraham's old. He still blessed them to prosper and to grow and to become a great nation, did he not? Well, and here comes his son, Jesus Christ. So the Father is in the Old Testament. Here comes his son, Jesus Christ. Lo, I come in the volume of the book is written of me. And what does Christ say to his church? Go ye into all the world and do what? Preach the gospel. And what did God do? He blessed that. So God is this God that multiplies, he blesses, he multiplies, he blesses, and then his people start acting a fool, right? And then all of a sudden there's a controversy between God and his people. So in the Old Testament, there was this repeated pattern of which the book of Daniel teaches us, the book of Ezekiel, and the book of Zechariah. So for those of you who are taking notes, here's how I break up those 3 in terms of relationships with God. In the book of Daniel, what God teaches us through Daniel is the beast Gentile nation relationship. The beast Gentile nation relationship, because Israel, according to the covenant, is scattered for its disobedience, right? Now it's among the nations. Israel scattered. Deuteronomy 28, Leviticus 26. I will scatter you among the nations. Now we see what national Israel looks like and acts like under Babylon, Medo-Persia, the Grecian kingdom, and then ultimately what? The Roman Empire. So that's called the beast Gentile nation. And what characteristic of God is overseeing that? The king. God is king. He's king over Babylon. He's king over Medo-Persia. He's king over the Grecian kingdom. He's king over the Roman Empire. That's what we're learning in the book of the Revelation. By the way, the book of the Revelation is about God as king over the Roman Empire. Like he was over Egypt, like he was over Babylon, like he was over the Medo-Persian kingdom, as he was over Egypt. God has proven himself to be king over Egypt, has he not? Beautiful narrative of the Exodus account. Ezekiel is about to talk to you and I in Ezekiel 16. I'm going to be dealing with some verses here in a moment from chapters 5 to 16. Ezekiel is about to introduce us to the wife / whore of Jehovah, or that is God, and the emphasis is on the father who begets Israel as a wife who practices whoredoms. That's the wife whore paradigm, the wife whore paradigm of God the Father, because God the Son did not marry national Israel. You guys got that language? It's important for you to get. God the Father speaks to national Israel. I am a husband to you. That's how God talks. Jeremiah chapter 3, Isaiah chapter 50, Deuteronomy 24, etc. And so as a king, God is acting as Lord of Lords over all the nations. He's proving himself sovereign, and he doesn't mind doing that. He created them. In the book of Ezekiel 16, we'll go there in a moment, God is dealing with a rebellious wife who ends up playing the what? Harlot against God the Father. That's his controversy with his wife. If you never read Ezekiel 16, you need to. You find out what God meant back in Exodus chapter 20, excuse me, when he said, I am the Lord your God that brought you out of Egypt. I am a jealous God. That's the God of the Bible in relationship to his covenant blessings upon this wife who ultimately started practicing what? Whoredoms. The book of Zechariah is going to give us the language that we have in the book of the Revelation called the temple. The temple. The temple. This is where we got the two witnesses and the olive trees and the temple in Revelation chapter 11. And the whole temple motif that you and I know is emblematic or affirmed by the emblematic expression of Revelation chapter 1, verse 13. Verse 12, rather, I turned and I saw a golden candlestick or a menorah and him who was in the middle of it, the Lord Jesus. So that's the temple motif. There it is. I saw a candlestick. Then verse 13, Christ in the midst of that. So we have this temple that we're going to call a correlation of God the Father as king, in terms of the Gentiles, and God the Father as husband in terms of national Israel, the whore. But the temple is who? It's the body of Christ. It's the bride and city. It's the bride and city of the Son. It's the bride and city of the Son. Now, what's going to be important about that terminology is the trajectory of the book of the Revelation, because once we leave chapter 16, we're going into chapter 17, and chapter 17 opens up talking to us about a what? A harlot. And then chapter 18 talks about a city. So we go into this imagery about a harlot, which you and I are going to get a little taste of it here in a moment, and then we go into chapter 18, and then you get a city. And I'm suggesting to you that have been committed to our studies, you're going to be seeing two sides of the same coin. You already know that it's understandable that God would give the motif of a city as being a woman. Jerusalem, who is the mother of us all, right? So you're going to look at a harlot and then a city, and then the closing out of your Bible is going to be a woman, a bride, and then a city. The New Jerusalem is a bride in a city. That's how it closes out, so that your Bible closes out in Revelation chapter 21, verse 17, and the Spirit and the bride say, come. And the Spirit and the bride say, come. 22:17, rather. And the Spirit and the bride say, come. So you see the way the apocalypse closes is that there's a woman who gets it right, who's committed to her husband, who's empowered by the Spirit to call men and women to the wedding feast of the Son of God, because that's her job. She's showing herself faithful, collaborating with her husband to have children that bring forth glory to God the Father. Does that make some sense? That's the motif. That's the language. And the Spirit and the bride say, come. And let him that heareth say, come. And let him that is athirst come, and whosoever will, let him take of the water of life freely. So the Bible actually closes out with the victory of the woman, who is also the city, who is in the midst of God the Father, and in the midst of God the Son, and in the midst of God the Holy Spirit, and their territory is a neo-paradisial fullness that is beyond our ultimate conception. So the Bible closes out on a very confident note, doesn't it? Does that help you guys? So now watch this. This is what we want to do. We want to begin to understand something about this framework. So in under the fourth plague, I'm going to stretch you out a little bit. Here under the fourth plague, like I said, there are parallels. So in Revelation 16, what we got was the first plague, or vial, was poured out on the earth. In verse 2, it was poured out on the earth. poured out on the earth. So notice, it's not poured out on the people directly, it's poured out upon the what? Earth first. And from the earth there fell a noisome and grievous sore upon the men. Now notice verse 3. And the second angel poured out his vial upon the what? Sea. So you have the juxtaposition of the earth and the sea. So he's pouring his vial out on the sea. And then number 3, verse 4, and the third angel poured out his vial upon the what? Rivers. So remember we talked about that last week. And we dealt with it a little bit more, I think it was last week, where we dealt with the river of the water of life coming out of the temple. That might have been yesterday as well. But it shows us how that God is now smiting the earth, and the earth then is afflicting the people. This is an indirect judgment on humanity. Well, this reminds us of the Exodus motif, doesn't it? Because God smote the water. God smote the land. He smote the cows. Then he started smiting the people. Remember that in the Exodus motif. And what's that telling us? That God will work through ecological abnormalities. He will bring about the destruction of the earth in relationship to man's rebellion against him, to shake mankind up. And this is what Jesus was teaching when he said, men's hearts will fail them for the things that they see coming upon the earth. There will be wars and rumors of wars. There will be earthquakes in diverse places and all kinds of troubles in the lives of men. And this is part of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse that you and I also looked at. But then notice what it says here. After that he pours his vial upon the waters. Over in verse 8, he does what? The fourth angel pours his vial out upon the what? So you got earth, you got sea, you got waters, and then you got the sun. Well, what I just want you to know is there is a repeat. This is a repeat of the same pattern given to us in the trumpet judgment. So if you go back to Revelation chapter 8, I just want you to see how this is parallel to it, though slightly different. But the parallels are there because there obviously is a lesson that you and I want to learn as to how God actually begins to discipline and judge and punish in order to respond to the sufferings of his people. So we read in Revelation chapter 8, where the 7 angels with the 7 trumpets are before God. And we read in verse 5, and the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar and cast it to the what? There it is. So the first thing is cast to the earth, right? Cast to the earth, and there were voices and thunders and lightnings and earthquake. There's always terminology of God acting in sovereign power. Verse 6, and the 7 angels which had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. And the first angel sounded, and there followed hail, fire, mingled with what? There you go. And they cast upon the earth. Notice that? Upon the earth, just like the other angel. They cast it upon the earth. And the third part of the trees were burned up, and all green grass was what? The word I want you to capture here, because this here is going to force us to a book, it's the third part. I told you this several months back. The third part. The third part. The third part. We're going to be forced to go to Ezekiel and to Zechariah because they tell us about the third part. Unless we don't care about the Bible and its particulars, then we can overlook this, but that would be ridiculous because there is something massively supernatural about the fact that God is smiting only a third part, leaving 2/3 unsmited. Well, very much like when we worked our way through the Exodus account, right? How that God brought judgment on the land of Egypt, but totally protected the land of Goshen where God's people were. It showed that God was being particular and specific in his judgment. He was not being chaotic or wasteful. This was not Mother Nature losing control. This was the sovereign God designating judgment in a particular area and not beyond that. And so here he's using that same language. We don't fully know what the 2/3, 1/3 is, but we're getting ready to have some exercising of our biblical senses around that here in a moment. But notice what he says over in verse 8. And the second angel sounded, as it were, a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the what? Sea. There it is. So you got the earth, you got the sea, and the sea became what? Blood. blood. And the third part of the sea became blood. And it was only the third part. And the third part of the creatures which were in the sea that had life died. And the third part of the ships were destroyed. Now, please understand what God is doing. He's giving you poetic imagery, language about a catastrophe that he has imposed upon the people group who are his antagonists. But just think about this. Only a third part of the ships are destroyed. I mean, how do we know that? We can't know that. God has to tell you that. Only a third part. But that's because he's exercising your senses and mine in spiritual principles around how he calculates. You guys got that? How he calculates. All you need to know is he's repeating a principle of third parts that if you do the research, you'll find it out, okay? I just want you to know. So right now, we can say this like we said yesterday. God's been merciful, even now. He's being merciful because it could be everybody. It could be 2/3. Right now, it's only what? 1/3. So we're listening to you, Lord. You're bringing your trumpet judgments to warn humanity, and all you're doing is discomfiting 1/3 of the human race. 1/3 of the people group are you disturbing. You're allowing the 2/3, like we learned yesterday. There were people who observed what God was doing, didn't they? You observe what God is doing so that you can acknowledge that it's God doing it. And for some of those people out of the 2/3, some are going to trust God and stay in their places, and others are going to misinterpret that judgment. Why? Because the 1/3 are wiped out. So with the 2/3, they both get the witness. Only 1/3 is going to get it right. The other third is not going to get it right. We call them the elect and non-elect. Y'all got that terminology? It's nice and clean because it's only symbolism. It's not dealing with literal numbers here. The thing you got to learn about the book of the Revelation, like what we learned about the two witnesses rising again from the dead, and a great earthquake slew 7,000 men in Revelation chapter 17. 7,000, why not 7,010? 7,000 because we're dealing with symbolism. You guys understand that? The number 7 representing completion. The number 1,000 representing multitude of completion. That event there in Revelation chapter 11 was an answer to the 7,000 prophets that did not bow the knee to Baal in the days when the symbolic Elijah, who was part of the two witnesses. Now, they were not literally Elijah and Moses. They were more likely who? John the Baptist and the Lord Jesus, right? In the authority of the whole canon of Scripture. But in the same way in which Elijah preached during the days when Jezebel was destroying Israel, there were 7,000 who did not what? Bow the knee. So God, in the language of the book of the Revelation, where Elijah's qualities, Elijah's gifting is showing up, along with Moses's, is demonstrating how that God will still prevail. Even in the killing of these two witnesses, unnamed witnesses with the qualities of Moses and Elijah, are rising from the dead. And in their resurrection, 7,000 who are idolatrous rebels against God die in their resurrection. I get that. Can you get that? And so what God is saying is, even in the death of the saints, God's power is still able to be manifested in destroying his foes, which is what happened when they rose again from the dead. That was an ominous insight into the fact that the second death will not have power over you. So we see this third part being expressed. And again, look at verse 10. And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon a third part of the what? Now, how do you do that unless you're God? Third part of the river. So I'm with you, Lord. I'm hearing the third part. I'm hearing the third part. Teach me the revelation. I'm trying to share it a little bit with you. That God is being merciful, although he's bringing judgment, and he's dividing the whole land into 3 parts, 1/3 and 2/3. We're getting ready to be exercising that principle in the Old Testament in a moment. Remember, the books that are going to help us is Daniel, Ezekiel, and Zechariah. They're going to help us with this. So then we read over in verse 11, and the name of the star is called wormwood, and a third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. And verse 12 now, and the fourth angel sounded, and a third part of the what? There we go again. You see the parallels between the trumpet judgments and the bowl judgments? Do you guys see it? Earth, sea, fountain of waters, and then what? Sun. Got it. Earth, sea, fountain of waters, and sun. So God smites the water basins, which are needed for life, and then he starts with the heavens. So he's smiting the sun. But listen to the language here. This is quite interesting. You and I don't have to know everything. I'm working through one of the old patristic fathers, and I love one of the statements that he said. He says that it is pathetic and sad that men think that they need to know everything that knowledge can grant them, when in getting all the knowledge they possibly can get, they still don't get God. He says it would be much better to get God and not get all the knowledge than get all the knowledge and not get God. So see, the thing that you and I never want to be trapped by is the notion that the answer is merely in the knowledge. It's in the God that the knowledge leads us to that grants us life. So I don't need to know everything about all the minutiae of the text. All I need to know is the God behind it and the purpose behind it and how it plays out in terms of its redemptive implications to my life. Am I making some sense? Otherwise, I'm going to slip into what you and I don't ever want to slip into, and that's called Gnosticism. What is Gnosticism? It's the assumption that we can reach a state of perfection before God based upon knowledge. And that is a fool's errand. We don't need all knowledge to know God. We just need some knowledge. And once we get God, we don't need nothing but God. Because God can communicate to us sufficiently what he needs us to know without us feeling compelled that we got to know everything in order to be sufficient. I don't need to know everything in order to be sufficient. All I need to know is God. And then if he wants to give me just a little bit, he'll show me that that little bit is sufficient to sustain me until he gives me more. After all, God saves me for a relationship, not to give me a PhD. Does that make sense? It's important who we know before what we know, so that what we know is based on who we know and not how much we know. How much we know will set you and I up for pride, and God will then have to do what? Resist us. And so I just wanted to share that with you. Enjoy the journey. When you're studying the Word of God and you get a chance to put the hands of your spirit into the text and work that glorious, clean, pure, pristine sand of the promises of God, you get the picture of just working your hand in the sand. The heat has come down on the sand, and the sand is warm, and the sand is glistening, and the sand is beautiful. All of the granular aesthetic implications of that, as y'all know what I'm talking about. Anybody know what I'm talking about? I'm just being a little child right now, just loving the Word of God, just sticking my hand in it, playing with it. And when I look around, if nobody's looking, I take a little bit and eat too, because I need the vitamin nutrients that come from the sand. Anybody know what I'm talking about? And it tastes real good. Yes! And your body needs it too, whether you know it or not. And so truth is like that. So here we see this pattern. The fourth angel sounded, third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars, and the third part of the what? Stars, and the third part of the what? Stars. So that a third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a third part, and the night likewise. Somebody explain that on a natural level of science. You can't. You can't explain that. Are we talking about a third part of the day chronologically? Are we talking about a third part of the day physiologically? Are we saying a third part of the earth had light and the other 2/3 didn't? The third part of the stars were blinded and the other part, or obscured rather, and the others weren't? You and I don't know. All we know is that God is giving us a pedagogy on the term thirds. You guys got that? So I'm going to help you with one more verse around the thirds, because that's the book. The trumpet judgments deal with the thirds. So this is Revelation chapter 12, verse 4. And then we're getting ready to move to the Old Testament. And his tail, the tail of who? The dragon, drew the what? third part of the what? So God is continuing this narrative of the third part. And his tail drew the third part. Not 2/3, 1/3. Just like what's going on in Revelation 8, right? So now the dragon is in on this third part scenario. All right. So start right now, Zechariah chapter 13, verse 9. So we're going to start with Zechariah. We're going to back up to Ezekiel, and we're going to just play a little bit more with the numbers. Don't go to sleep on me. Don't let the numbers knock you out. We're not going to do any equations, no calculations, just reading. Okay, no calculations, just reading. I'm going to show you something. I'm in Zechariah chapter 13. Are you there? Look at verse 9. He says, and I will bring the what? The third part through the what? Is that what it says? I will bring the third part through the fire, and I will do what? Refine them as what is refined. And I will try them as gold is tried. They shall call on my name, and I will hear them. I will say, it is my people, and they shall say, it is what? This is my God. So there is a third part in Zechariah's conversation that goes through hell and comes out on the other side purified. So the people that are reading the book of the Revelation, the Apocalypse, written almost 100 years, the first century AD, who are very familiar with the Old Testament language, they would have been hypersensitized to that 1/3 language, would they not have? Particularly if they read Torah. But we're not done here. This is just a start. And what's quite fascinating about this language here, about the third part, if you understand the context, this is about the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ and what happens shortly after that. Look back at verse 11, chapter 13, look at chapter 13, starting back at verse 6. I'm going to start at verse 6. And one shall say unto him, what are these wombs in your what? So we got a dialogue going on with somebody that recognizes that somebody has wombs in their hands. Let me keep going. Then he shall answer, those with which I was what? Wounded in the house of my what? Now who's talking here? Jesus. Now somebody has recognized the wombs, and I can say this now because you guys have come to class and you need to be blessed with this. You know the wombs. You've recognized the wombs. You know the true wombs from the false wombs. You know the one who was truly wounded for your sins. He was smitten and stricken of God. You know the one that was chastised for your peace. You know the one that suffered and bore your transgressions. These are the wombs. You recognize him. You also, therefore, recognize the false wound of that first beast who only put on a form of godliness in the state religion. The true believer knows the difference between the wombs of Christ and the wombs of the state. You guys understand that? They can discern the true shepherd. It's critical to know that because the false shepherd is coming with a form of religion too, impressing you with a kind of resurrection motif. Obviously, we are in resurrection mode here, are we not? Because the brother's walking around with wounds in his hands. And is this not John's Gospel chapter 20 and Luke's Gospel chapter 24, where Christ comes into the midst of the disciples and shows them his hands and his feet and his side, and particularly Brother Thomas, who had to have a physically born witness of the resurrection of Christ, for which after he actually bore record when Christ gave him the right to stick his hand in his side and stick his hand into the handprints, and be no more unbelieving, but believing, Thomas bowed before him and said, my Lord and my God. It's a revelation of the true and the living God revealed in the resurrected Christ, the truth of the gospel. You guys got that? Wish I had time to talk about the story about how Thomas died. He actually believed this gospel, went down to India, and they did him wrong. They killed him like they did with all the apostles, but he kept his eyes on Christ. And so it's important for you and I to see the narrative. Watch how the narrative flows out. Verse 6 says, let me see, where am I at? Verse 7 says, awake, O sword, against my shepherd. Now who's talking here? God the Father. Who is his shepherd? God the Son. Awake, O sword, against my shepherd, and against the man that is my what? What is God saying about the shepherd? That he's equal to the Father. Against my fellow. Now, when God is talking and he calls someone his fellow, he's making him equal with God. Do you guys understand that? None of us are God's fellow. A fellow is a person that bears equality with you. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was with God, face to face with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God, and he made all things. There was nothing that was made that the Word did not make. So when the Spirit of God is using this language here of the fellow, he is saying that Jesus, who is his shepherd, is his fellow. That's the term that Jesus used in the Psalm 69, about the Jewish people. He said it was one, my fellow, who betrayed me. And who was he talking about? Judas Iscariot. He wasn't making Judas equal to him in his deity. He was making Judas equal to him in his what? Humanity. Are you guys learning something here? He was making Judas equal to him in his humanity. And then he was also doing something extremely unique with regards to Judas being his fellow, because Judas had a part in the apostleship. So Judas actually was highly favored. It's kind of funny, too, because when we look at verse 5, and the question was raised, verse 6 rather, and the question was raised, what are these wounds which you have? Then he answered and said, those with which I was wounded in the house of my what? Now, who were his friends? The apostles. And who was the one that he said friend? Judas Iscariot. Why are you betraying me? Right? So Christ never viewed his enemies as his enemies while he was actually occupying the office of mediator. He constantly loved them even unto the end, called them friends. It's important for you to see that theology. But now we see in verse 7 where God the Father is calling the shepherd, which is God the Son, his own fellow. And then he says, thus saith the Lord of hosts, smite the shepherd. What is this referring to? His death on the cross. And the sheep shall be what? That means the disciples took off, didn't they? And all of those who followed Jesus. This is describing, obviously, AD 33, was it not? That period of time in which Christ died. Notice, and I will turn my hand upon who? The little ones. Now, what is God doing here now? He's getting ready now to scatter national Israel. And I will turn my hands upon the little ones. He's getting ready to scatter national Israel. This is what Christ meant when he said to Israel, when he came, this is Luke's Gospel, chapter 13, how oft I would have gathered you, like a mother hen gathers her little ones, but you would not, referring to the rulers who constantly forbade Christ to preach to the people of Israel. And because they rejected him, he did what? He scattered the little ones. This is the scattering that you see going on in the book of the Revelation and the book of Daniel. Daniel kept talking about scattering. Remember? Scattering the power of the holy people. Daniel chapter 12, verse 7. Pull that up. And then I'll look at just one more verse here. Just notice how Daniel closes out in Daniel 12, 7. We'll come back. And I heard a man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left unto the heaven. And we've seen this language in the book of Revelation as well, chapter 10. And he sware by him that liveth forever, that it shall be for what? A time, a times and a half a time. That's the 3.5 years that's in the book of Revelation, right? Remember, the book of Revelation doesn't have 7 years. It doesn't have a last week. It only has a time and a half a time. So here Daniel closes out with this language. And notice what he says. During that time, times and a half, which is utilized both for the bride, is utilized for the two witnesses, but it's also utilized for the dragon. The dragon will blaspheme God's name, his tabernacle, and them that dwell in it for a time, a times and a half a time, for 42 months. Now notice what it says. And when he shall have accomplished to do what? Scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be what? Finished. Now what will be finished is the end of the old covenant. What will be finished is the temple. What will be finished is that outward center where men and women would come to contemplate who the true and the living God was. Finished meaning now that the New Testament is brought into effect, they don't come to Jerusalem, Jerusalem comes to them, right? Tarry ye here in Jerusalem until you be endued with power from on high, and from Jerusalem take this gospel where? Into all the world. Judea, Samaria, uttermost parts of the world. Well, how are they going to do it? How are the people of God going to go into all the world? Daniel says they're going to be what? Scattered. Do you guys see that? Daniel says they're going to be scattered. Well, Zechariah just said they're going to be what? Scattered. Is that what we read? Go back to Zechariah 12:7. I'm showing you how you put these concepts together by using scripture upon scripture and not merely opinionating in our mind, because the prophets are sufficiently capable of helping us put the narrative together by the word of God. Now notice again, I will turn my hands upon the little ones. And it shall come to pass in all the land, saith the Lord, 2 parts therein shall be what? Cut off and die, but the third part shall be left therein. So now we're back to third part principles. Well, when did that happen? In the scattering. That's when it happened. In the scattering. In the scattering. And so one more verse to underscore that scattering. It was just in my head. Acts chapter 8, verse 4. Acts chapter 8, verse 4. Now this is an extremely important piece. I'm trying to remember, is this Caligula or is this Claudius? I think it's going to tell me Claudius. Start at verse 1, if you will. Acts 8:1. And Saul was consenting unto the death of the people of God. He was the one this just ends the first martyrdom of who? Stephen. And at that time there was what? Great persecution against the church, which was at what? So can you see the threads that we're putting together here? Can you see the threads? God's prophecy is targeting Jerusalem because Jerusalem has come to its end covenantally. And God's now about to bust it up because of its persistent rebellion against God. Here comes the son, who is the heir. They kill him, wanting to take the kingdom. He rises again from the dead, as the 2 witnesses do. And now God is coming in power to bust up Israel, bust up Jerusalem. But what is he going to do in the process? Scatter his little ones. Because these are all his little ones. We know that because in the 9th chapter coming up, Saul, Saul, it is hard for you to kick against the pricks. Why are you persecuting thou me? Now notice what it says. And they were all what? Scattered abroad throughout the region of Judea and what? So do you get it now? Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria. Do you know the map of Samaria is pushing you up to go into Asia Minor? Do you guys know that? Pull up the map. Let me just help them sister in class today. I'll just help you if you don't see it. This is like you got maps in the back of your Bible. But I'm just going to show you. Watch the map. So you see where it says Judea way down here? So Judea way down here, if I actually brought this, so I can do this now. I got 30 minutes with you. So let me see if this is going to work. Yeah, so Judea. Now right here is where the scattering takes place. Here is where the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, Revelation chapter 12, verse 6, and then verse 14. And she was scattered into the what? Wilderness. That's where they were scattered there. And then they started making their way, started preaching the gospel from Jerusalem all the way up to where? So now you notice that Samaria is moving up, right? It's going to go up past Galilee into, where's this area here? See, the other map would be much more adequate in showing that this is Asia Minor. Give me the 7 churches, because we're moving from Judea to Samaria. Remember Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, uttermost parts of the world. This is called Gentile country. Pull up the 7 churches and you'll see that we're in the area. Or you can just pull up the map for the Roman Empire. So we're going what? What is this by way of direction? That's north, right? This is a bad map. There's a better map than that. But this is okay. You see Jerusalem, even worse. Go back. Just go back. Go back, please. I love you. I love you. Here we are, Jerusalem, right? So we know we're going up north, right? Right? So we know we're going north, right? We're going upward, heavenward, not south. Heavenward. So Antioch is where they first were called what? Christian. Acts chapter 11, Acts chapter 15. And then Paul took them on out into Gentile territory. This is Asia Minor. Remember what we learned yesterday? This is where the beast, what? Throne is. This is Athens. Where is this? This is the book of what? Corinth. Corinth. Up here is Rome. The Roman Empire is in control of all of this land here. The Roman Empire, you see where I am? All of this is the beast is controlling all that. And the gospel went south, it went north, it went here, largely due to the Apostle Paul's ministry, right? John the Apostle is on the island of Patmos. He was the last pastor at the church at Ephesus, where he ministered to early patristic fathers like Polycarp and others as well. Irenaeus is doing ministry here in Smyrna. And so here is where Satan, his throne is, and guess who he's persecuting? He's persecuting the 7 churches, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. He's persecuting the 7 churches. So in your mind, as we're reading the book of the Revelation, this is the area that you have to keep in mind. Why? Because believers are here, but believers are also here in Athens, aren't they? First and second what? Corinthians. Now we move up here. If we had a better map of the Roman Empire, guess what? The book of what? Romans. You got Roman Christians up here. So it started down here, saints, with 11 men. And then 120 in the upper room on Pentecost. And the book of Acts worked for about 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years until Paul gets into the conversation. And then this thing busts out and goes all the way up into the Roman Empire, of which Paul calls the known world. Y'all got that? That helps you to see. There it is. Bless you, my sister. Bless you, my child. This might work. I don't know. This looks so bad. It just looks so bad. This is one of them old maps with the old language. Where's Rome at? Gallia is Rome. Italia, there it is. Italia is Rome. This is Rome. Over here, Macedonia is the area. Asia Minor is the area where the 7 churches are. Macedonia, still, this is the island of Patmos, if you guys don't know. This here's Arabia, way down here. Okay, Arabia's on the backside, up in this area. Syria, this is Palestine. This is Israel. This is Jerusalem, all right? So we're still going up north. And notice, what's this word? Britain. What's this word? Germany. So the gospel is going all the way up here too. It got way up there shortly after the ministry of the Apostle Paul and Peter. Paul and Peter are killed by the Roman Empire in Rome, 64, 65 AD. 64 to 66 AD. Who's ruling at the time that they killed Paul and they killed Peter? Crazy Nero. Okay? And then in the book of the Revelation, where we're dealing with the 7 churches, Nero's out and Vespasian and Titus has taken over. Wish I had time. But they're beasts too. And over here is where the Roman emperor worship was being reinforced in Pergamus, where Satan's throne is. And so the saints had to deal with the state enforced pagan religion of worshiping the emperor, okay? But they wouldn't do it. However, these people down here, the earthly Jews, the earthly Jerusalem, guess what? They bowed the knee to that pagan god, didn't they? How do we know? John chapter 19, verse 15 says, we have no king but who? And they were part of that beast that rose up out of the pit to kill the 2 witnesses. You guys got that? And they're all part of this, because the Jews are all up here too. The Jews were scattered right along with the Christians. Going back to Acts chapter 8, verse 3 and 4. I got a little time before I close it down. So, and for Saul, he made havoc of the church, entering into every house and hailing men and women, committed them to prison. Verse 4. Therefore, they that were scattered abroad went where? Where did they go? Everywhere, preaching the word, scattering the seed under persecution. So I started with Daniel 12 verse 7. We actually started with Zechariah chapter 13 verse 9, 7 through 9. Smite the shepherd and the sheep shall be what? And then we went to Daniel 12:7, and now we've come to Acts, right? Because we see how they were scattered now. Under what? Persecution. Persecution drove them out. All right, so it's time for me to give you another example of the 1/3. Ezekiel is about to teach us something about God's controversy with his wife. Ezekiel chapter 5. Let me show you a couple more passages before we close. I want you to have the level of sensitivity if you were a Jew who had been brought up under Torah and you lived and witnessed your family who were told by God that he had redeemed you out of Egypt, like we learned in the Exodus account. And God redeemed them out of Egypt with blood, didn't he? And they were his servants. They were his bride. They were his son. They were his children. And what did God tell Israel in Torah? You shall have no other gods before me. In the Exodus 22, 3 and 4, he says, you shall not make any graven image. You shall not make any likeness of anything above in the heavens, or anything on the earth, or anything in the water under the earth. I am the Lord your God. The one thing that God told Israel not to do is engage in idol worship. Don't make images. You guys follow what I'm saying? Now, why did he tell them not to make images? Because all the pagans were making images. All the other gods had images. They had images of horses, images of cows, images of frogs, images of dogs. They made images out of everything and bowed down and worshiped them. Are you guys hearing me? But the one true and living God, of whom he told them in Deuteronomy chapter 4, when I came to you, you saw no image. There was no similitude. I didn't come in some physical person. I'm spirit. And they that worship me must worship me in what? Spirit and in truth. Do not try to make an image of me, because for you to try to make an image of me in my ontological nature, which you cannot see because I'm spirit, would be for you to create a what? Lie. Now this is important. Because what you and I are learning in the book of Revelation chapter 13 is how the beast is lying. He's lying. Idol making is what? Lying. You guys got that? That's the terminology that God uses. To try to craft an image of God is to make a lie. Got it? It's to make a lie. It's to make a lie. And I'm just going to lock in one New Testament verse before we get exercise in God's controversy with Israel. And I want you to see this in Revelation chapter 21. And I'm almost sure it's Revelation 21, verse 27. Yep. Look at Revelation 21, 27. And here's what he says. And there shall in no wise enter into, that is the New Jerusalem, the kingdom, into it anything that what? Defileth, neither whatsoever worketh what? Abomination, or maketh what? There it is, which is the same thing. All three of those, that's a Hebrew triadism. Triadism. It's a Hebrew triadism. Just like the term holy, 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 this is a triadic statement. The thing that defiles and the thing that's abominable is a lie. This is why Paul said in Romans chapter 1, verse 21, that they worship the creature rather than the creator, right? And they changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like unto corruptible things, four-footed beasts, creeping things, and mankind, right? Remember that? That is the fundamental sort of overarching history and legacy of rebellious man. And whenever you and I make an idol of God, we are making a what? An abomination that is also what? A lie. I need you to get that. A lie, because we're distorting God's image. We're distorting God's image. I'm going to bring that home in a redemptive way in a moment. But whenever you and I distort God's image, we are creating a what? All right, good. Ezekiel chapter 5 now. Let's hang out with Ezekiel for a minute. This is where I said many, many years ago when I was a young man, I said, Lord, I am so glad I was not born in the Old Testament. When I read Ezekiel and saw how upset God was with this woman and the kind of language he used, I said, man. And then he would just, Ezekiel, come here. Isaiah, come here. He got Isaiah running around with his butt out for 3 years. Not me, Lord. Don't. I grew up in the hood. We can't do that, Lord. We can't run around with our butt out in the hood. That would be an assignment that would require massive doses of faith, okay? And Ezekiel is laying naked on one side for 45 days, 390 days, another time in Ezekiel chapter 3. I mean, he got Ezekiel doing some stuff. The prophets had to embody God's revelation. You guys understand what I just said? They had to pantomime out God's revelation of disgust and repulsion against the rebellion of this woman that he has been so good to. So now I want to introduce you to the 1/3, 2/3 principle again, and I'm going to make our way all the way to Ezekiel 16 and show you that the real issue with which God has repeatedly destroyed national Israel, ethnic Israel, the Jerusalem which is below, is image making. And this is why in Revelation chapter 13, 16 and 17, I helped you understand that what they were dealing with contextually is making coins in the image of the Caesars. You guys remember that on Sunday? And they were being forced to accept that process in a form of worship and commerce, that if you didn't submit to that methodology, you couldn't buy and you couldn't sell. I want to show you how the scriptures clearly lay this out in the Ezekiel account. So Ezekiel chapter 1 says, "And thou, son of man, take a sharp knife, take thee a barber's razor, and cause it to pass upon your head and your beard. Then take the balances to weigh and divide the" what? Hair. Now you know what Ezekiel is now, right? He bald, completely baby-faced and bald, which in the Hebrew culture means that he is walking around ashamed. Okay? Ashamed. To be bald and to be beardless for a man is to be shamed. Okay? This is how Paul used the language concerning women who wanted to cut their hair in the book of Corinth because they wanted to be like men. In 1 Corinthians 11, he says if a woman cuts her hair, she might as well go bald because that's a shame for her to cut her hair like that in the name of her wanting to be a priestess. So here, notice what he says in verse 2. "You shall burn with fire," what? "A third part in the midst of the" what? "City." So he took his hair, he went into the midst of Jerusalem, and he did a display in the presence of the Jews. He took a third part of all of his hair and did what? Burned it. So the Jews are looking at him do this kind of dramatic play, and they're trying to figure out what in the world is this dude doing. But what does the hair represent? National Israel. Okay? Watch, this guy's going to explain it himself, not me. Notice what he says. Burn in the fire, third part in the midst of the city. When the days of the siege are fulfilled, and you shall take a third part and do what? Smite about it with a knife in their presence. So 1/3, he burns up, the other part, he smites. What is the hair a representation of? The people. Where are they at right now? Under siege. Why? Because Ezekiel is an exiled prophet. National Israel at this present time is under the judgment of the Babylonians. What they are seeing is how God is giving Israel over to being shamed and to being abused. You guys got that? Shamed and abused. And then he says, take the third part and smite about with a knife. And a third part you shall do what? There it is. Scatter to the wind. You guys see it? And I will draw out a sword after them. So what happens to a third part? It's scattered to the wind. One is burned, the other is abused, the third part scattered to the wind. Right. So you really have to just enjoy narrative language in order to follow it, because what you have to do with this account is you have to kind of like ride this account out if you actually want to kind of understand what God is up to. So I'm going to just take you a little bit further down the line so you can see what's going on. I'm down over in I'm going to go over to chapter 5, verse 11. Wherefore, as I live, saith the Lord God, surely because you have what? Defiled my sanctuary. So that's his controversy, the temple. Because you have defiled my sanctuary with all of your what? Now, what are these detestable things? They're the lies. They're the abominations. They are the what? Idols. The detestable things. And with all thine abominations, therefore will I diminish you. They are in the what? Take away. Remember, to whom much is given, more is given. To him that hath not, even that which he has shall be what? Taken away. They are in the diminishing. Neither shall mine eye spare, neither will I have any what? Now look at verse 12. A third part of you shall die with the pestilence, with famine shall they be consumed in the midst of thee, and a third part shall fall by the sword round about thee, and I will scatter a third part into all the wind, and I will draw out a sword after them. This is talking about the people. So the hair represented the people, did it not? So chapter 5 is unpacking the interpretation. Thus shall my anger be accomplished, and I will cause my fury to rest upon them, and I will be comforted, and they shall know that I, the Lord, have spoken it in my zeal when I have accomplished my fury on them. And he goes on to talk at length about his disapproval of them. Now go to chapter 6, and I want to show you how there's a redemptive element that's important to know. He just talked about scattering that third part to the wind, right? Scattering them to the wind. In chapter 6, verse 8, this is where we'll start. Chapter 6, verse 8 tells us, he says over here in verse 8, yet will I leave a what? That you may have some what? That escape the sword among the nations when you shall be what? Scattered through the countries. I want you to get it. See, so that 1/3 part, even though it's scattered, God knows where they are. He's going to bring a remnant out of that. Now remember, we've been talking about scattering. Daniel chapter 12, Acts chapter 8, verse 4. Now we see scattering again, don't we? So what I'm sharing with you is how national Israel understood keenly the way God worked, because this term scattering is in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 28 and Leviticus 26. It's part of the covenant curse, scattering them abroad. And that's exactly what Jesus meant in Matthew 24:15, when he says, when you see the abomination that maketh desolate. That's what he said in Matthew 21 when he says, and your houses shall be left to you desolate. He knew Israel was about to be scattered. But we're looking at the third part being mercifully dealt with in terms of God's redemptive purpose. Now notice what it says in verse 9. And they that escape of you shall do what? Remember me. Stop right there. Ah, look at God. He gonna kill up a bunch of rebel, demonically possessed, idol-worshiping, lie-making ethnic Jews. He's going to scatter them up into the world in third parts. That's what the book of the Revelation is about, in third parts. And 1/3 part is going to have a remnant in it. The whole third part's not going to be delivered, only a part of it. And here's the evidence that the third part, the remnant in the third part, is going to evidence to prove that God has showed mercy to them. They're going to remember the Lord. Do you see it? And they shall remember me among the nations, whither they shall be carried captive, because I am broken with your whorish heart. Man, look at your God. Now he's talking like a husband that's tired of a wife that is constantly be committing idolatry against him. Do you guys see that? So let me help you with this, because I want you to be able to take the analogy and connect it to the principal rebellion. The analogy is that of a husband who is watching his wife committing whoredoms with other men. Do you guys got that? Practically, that's Israel's priesthood bringing idols into the temple, which is God's house. She's bringing other men into the house and worshiping other men in the presence of her husband. Do you see it? You got to see it. You have to see it. This is why people don't know God because they don't read their Bible. And God's been talking a long time. Now, God told them way back thousands of years earlier. Now, when you come into the land, no idols. Don't do like the heathen around you. Don't absorb their practices, because they all have idols. I'm not an idol, God says. You can't make an image of me. Every image you make will be a distortion. It will be a, what's the word? Lie. Here it is. Powerful language. Because I am broken with your whorish heart, which hath what? Departed from me. And with their eyes, which do go a whoring after their idols. And they shall loathe themselves for the evil which they have committed in all their abominations. And they shall know that I am the Lord, that have not said in vain that I would do this evil unto them. He told them he would do it. See, he said, I told you I would scatter you to the four winds. Look at verse 16. I'm sorry, that's not verse 16. Go to chapter 7. Show you what's going on in chapter 7. Remarkable. I'm going to start at verse 16 in chapter 7. It's really important to kind of develop this picture because this corresponds to Revelation 13. I'm in verse 16. Are you there? Now watch what it says. But they that escape of them shall escape and shall be on the mountains like doves of the valley. All of them what? Mourning. Every one of them for his iniquity. Now, he's giving you the picture that the scattering is going to be so severe, people are hiding out in the mountains and in the caves. No more in the city. No more part of civil life. Scattered. And in the mountains and in the caves, now they are what? Mourning. Because they realize now they're under the judgment of God. And God has been patient with them for hundreds of years. All hands shall be feeble. Do you see it? And all knees shall be what? Weak as water. They shall also gird themselves with sackcloth, and horror shall cover them, and shame shall be upon all faces, and baldness upon all heads. Now watch this. This is beautiful. They shall cast their silver in the street. Do you see that? What's that, Pastor? They getting rid of their money? No, they're getting rid of their false lovers. But I want you to understand the correlation between buying and selling and idol making, because that's Revelation 13, 16, and 17. Replicate the idol and you get to buy and sell. Right? Replicate the idol and I'll let you live. Now here they are in the mountains. What good is the gold and the silver now? It's no good, is it? They realize that the gods that they have made with their own hands, and I'm going to show you something horrible in a moment, to which they bow down and worship, could not deliver them from Jehovah. I'm going to show you something wild after I show you something amazing. But I want you to think about this with me for a moment. What you're listening to and looking at is what I call reprobation. What do you mean by that, Pastor? How do you meet the true and the living God the way these people did when the true and the living God came into Egypt and busted up every one of their false gods, delivered them out of Egypt, brought them through the wilderness so that they became millions, and brought them into the land of Palestine by an outstretched hand, by a cloudy pillar by day, and a pillar of fire by night, and gave them manna, and gave them quail, and gave them fresh water, and the rock that gave them water followed them all the way through the wilderness. How do you know a God who is that real and that provisional, and then get to a land and then carve out an idol made out of stone or gold or silver or bronze and then bow down to it unless you become reprobate in your mind? Right? That's why God called them in the book of Jeremiah, reprobate silver you are. So you see how they're losing their mind? And now God has to bring about a catastrophic judgment to wake up just a few of them. Only a few of them are waking up. They're not all, 2/3 are not. 1/3 is not. It's just some among the 1/3. And this is how you wake up. You repent, you recognize your horrible rebellion, and then you abandon that God that you formally attach yourself to, and you make it clear that that's an idol. That's called confession. It's an idol. Does it make some sense, saints? They cast their silver in the streets, and their gold shall be removed. Their silver and their gold shall not be able to deliver them in the day of the wrath of the Lord. They shall not satisfy their soul, neither fill their bowels, because it is the stumbling block of their what? Now, again, this is what God repeats because I want to drive it home for you, because this same paradigm is in the book of the Revelation, verse 20. As for the beauty of his ornament, he set it in majesty. Who's talking here now? Ezekiel. He's prophesying about the goodness of God, taking national Israel and calling her an ornament. As for the beauty of his ornament, I want to show you something about what I said to you on Sunday about why God positioned national Israel in Palestine the way he did. As for the beauty of his ornament, he set it in what? Majesty on high, like you do when you take a precious stone and put it in that setting so that it lifts up over the ring, that big old stone. Now you got a broke brother, sisters, y'all don't get those big stones, y'all get those little ones. You got to pull out the magnifying glass and show it to people. See how beautiful that is? But the big fat ones are set out. That's what God did with national Israel. He set national Israel out as a massive, beautiful ornament for the world to see. Do you understand what I'm getting at? For the world to see. As an ornament, he set it in majesty. But what did they do? They made the images of their abomination and of their detestable things where? In where? The temple. Because remember, the temple becomes the place where the whole world comes to meet Jehovah. In the beauty of the Ark of the Covenant, where the mercy seat is in the Holy of Holies. This is where men and women were to come to Jerusalem. God says, I will meet you at the mercy seat. That's why he allowed Solomon to build this massively glorious edifice in 7 years. And all the pagans came to Jerusalem, did they not? It was a stately building, and God is picturing it as Jerusalem, as the place where he set his glory. And yet what did they do? They snuck husbands in. They snuck husbands in. Detestable things therein. Therefore I have set it what? Far from them. Verse 21. And I will give it into the hand of the what? Strangers. That's the Gentiles for a prey. And to the wicked of the earth for a spoil. And they shall do what? That's the abomination that maketh desolate. That's the whole book of Daniel. That's Daniel chapter 7, Daniel chapter 8, Daniel chapter 11. We've been there, have we not? So God gave his temple over. This is Revelation chapter 11 when he says, mark, measure out the Holy of Holies and the altar and them that worship therein. But the court which is without, given to the hands of the Gentiles. You guys see the correlation now? What God is doing is giving up his bride because she herself has abandoned faithfulness and fidelity. Got a little bit more to go. Look at verse 22. My face will I turn also from them, and they shall pollute my what? Secret. Yeah, secret. Secret. Right, need you to get it. Need you to get it, saints. For God, worship is the profundity of intimacy between the bride and her husband in a spiritual unity that is represented by the term secret, for which no one other than him and her should know. You guys got that? That's the language that God himself uses about the worship of the people of God as being so uniquely, exquisitely, intimately, exclusively bound to him that he calls it a secret. My face will I turn from them, and they shall pollute my secret for the robbers. Isn't that the group of people Jesus is dealing with? For the robbers shall enter into it and do what? And I told you on Sunday, Jesus began his ministry by going into the temple and cleaning up these clowns. And he closed out his ministry by going into the temple and clearing out those clowns, and then he left, never ever to go back into the temple. What was the controversy that the Son had with the church at that time? The same controversy that the Father had. Israel worships idols. They were idolaters, and they were what? Covetous. They loved money. They loved money. So now that we have looked at that, look over in Let's see here. I think that's the portion. That's the furthest portion that I want out of that. Go with me now over to Ezekiel chapter 9. So I wish I had time. Walking through chapter 8 and chapter 9 of Ezekiel, I want you to go to Ezekiel chapter 9, verse 11. What you're about to see now, God has made this controversy. He's going to allow Ezekiel to be taken up in the spirit to go into the temple to see how all the rulers have privately and secretly worshiped idols on the walls. Do you guys know that language of Ezekiel going into a hole in the temple and seeing all of the rulers worshiping pagan gods and the sun and the moon and Tammuz and all of that? All that is a symbol of what was going on in their heart. Ezekiel was able to see that. And we get to Ezekiel chapter 9, and over in Ezekiel 9, this is where you and I now have the book of the Revelation laying out, God bringing the judgment upon Israel. After that, he seals the servants in their forehead. You know that language now, right? The sealing of the servants in the forehead. I'll be talking about that on Sunday now that we're in chapter 4. Notice what it says here in Revelation, in Ezekiel chapter 9, verse 2. And behold, 6 men came from the way of the higher gate, which lieth toward the north, and every man a slaughtering weapon in his hand. And one man among them was clothed with linen, with a writer's inkhorn by his side. And they went in and stood beside the brazen altar. They're at the altar as the angels in the heaven are at the altar, right? And the glory of the God of Israel was what? Gone up from the cherub. You know what that means? He had departed from the mercy seat by which the people of God would have forgiveness. If God's not at the mercy seat, no forgiveness. That means they're under judgment. You guys see that, right? He was gone up from the cherub, whereupon he was to the threshold of the house. And he called to the men clothed with the linen. I said, the threshold of the house is the threshold of the temple. So he's left the Holy of Holies, the Spirit of God, and he's on the threshold of the temple. He's not done leaving yet, because he's giving instructions as to what should take place. But he's on his way out. He's about to mark out the temple as what? Ichabod. The Spirit of the Lord has departed. He hasn't left yet. Notice what it says in verse 4. And the Lord said unto him, go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem proper, and set a mark upon the forehead of the men that do what? Sigh and cry for all the abominations done in the midst thereof. So now, this here is a paradigm. This here is a model for us. Because the ones that sigh and cry are the ones protesting against the idolatries going on in the church. These are true Israelites who see the abominations and they are protesting. And what is God doing? He's doing what? Protecting them. Preserving. That's the seal, isn't it? Now, others are going to be what? Punished. And I'm going to show you that he's going to punish them because they are what? Egypto-Sodomites. Do you understand that? I'm getting ready to show you that in Ezekiel. That's why I'm saying the book of Revelation, it's intimately known by the people who've already gone through this. Look at what it says in verse 5. And to the others he said in my hearing, go ye after him through the city and smite. Let not your eye spare, neither have pity. Slay utterly, O young, both maid and little children and women, but come not near any man upon whom is the what? Mark. There it is. Isn't that the way the book of the Revelation lays out the preservation of the saints? Hold back the four winds until we have sealed our servants in their foreheads. Same language. And then he says, but come not near any man upon whom is the mark, and begin at my what? Then they began with the ancient men which were before the house, and said unto them, defile the house, fill the courts with the slain, go ye forth. And they went forth and slew in the city. And it came to pass while they were slaying them, and I was left, that I fell upon my face and cried and said, oh, Lord God, will you destroy all the residue of Israel and the pouring out of your fury upon Jerusalem? Then said he unto me, the iniquity of the house of Israel and Judah is exceedingly great, and the land is full of blood, and the city full of perverseness. For they say, the Lord has forsaken the earth, and the Lord does not see. You see how they have abandoned a true knowledge of God? That's called reprobation. Can God forsake anything in his ontological nature? How can God forsake anything in his ontological nature when God by nature is everywhere present? But they have collapsed into the same reprobation of mind that Adam and Eve did. Remember when they were blinded in the assumption that after having eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that they could hide from God? This is when you are making God an idol. When you misrepresent his character. You can do it in your own mind. If you believe that you can hide from God, you have just made God a liar. You hear me? If you believe that you can cover something up, you've just made God a liar. Because God says, the light and the darkness are the same with me. If you believe that you can go somewhere that God is not, you just made God a liar. He's everywhere present. All right, so what they are doing is demonstrating the reprobation of mind. We call it the noetic effect of sin, the diminishing of the mind's capacity to keep and maintain a proper comprehension of who God is. And when you meet human beings who are talking like this, you can know that they are in a desperately blinded state. It's even more remarkable when it's professing Christians. Because God has shown himself to these people to be the true and the living God. And now they have shrunk God down to a being that they think they can manipulate. Now notice what God says in verse 11. And as for me also, mine eye shall not spare. Neither will I have pity, but I will recompense their way upon their head. And behold, the man clothed with linen, which had the inkhorn by his side, reported the matter, saying, I have done as you have commanded. Did what? Mark all the saints. He's done marking the saints. And what's about to happen now? Judgment. So chapter 10 shows us the judgment being poured out. And it tells us over in chapter, the only verse I want you to see now in the closing out of this is in chapter 11, verse 22. Chapter 11, 22. Then I'm going to chapter 16 and close. Chapter 11, 22. Then did the cherubim lift up their wings, and the wheels beside them, watch this, and the glory of the God of Israel was over above, right? They're hovering over Israel. Look at verse 23. And the glory of the Lord went up from the midst of the city and did what? Stood upon the mountain which is on the east side of the city. Now it has left the threshold of the temple. Now it has gone out to the mountains. What does that mean? The temple no longer is sacred. The temple no longer is centered in God. The temple now is open for destruction. Do you guys understand that? The Spirit of God has left. And this is where Ezekiel says, and afterwards the Spirit took me up, brought me into the visions by the Spirit of God, all the way to Babylon, to them of the captivity. So the vision that I had went up from me. Then I spake unto them of the captivity, of all the things that the Lord had shown me. I love this. Now go to chapter 16. I'm closing here. So now, while you're headed to chapter 16, the Lord took Ezekiel up in the Spirit and took him all the way to Babylon, and he's talking to the people in Babylon about what God has just shown him. So you do know that there were people in Jerusalem and there were people in Babylon because the deportation took several times to occur. So Ezekiel is part of the early deportation of the Jews taken up to Babylon. And so you got Jews who were taken up early, very much like Daniel, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, and they don't really know what's going on down in Jerusalem. Because Jerusalem has been besieged first for 3.5 years. Then they were taken captive. So some of the Jews are being taken up to Babylon 800 miles away, which I had to map so you can see it and get a conception in your head. They had to walk. Can you pull up that map to show Jerusalem to Babylon? You can actually find it anyhow. I think maybe if you do, you pull it up. That's cool. It'll give you an idea of the arduous nature of their captivity. Because they didn't catch a plane, they didn't ride a boat, they walked. Anyhow, notice what it says in Ezekiel chapter 16. Now you guys do know this famous chapter, right? How many of you guys know Ezekiel 16? This is the one where God said, you were in your blood in the open field like a baby that was aborted, a baby that was abandoned. And I loved you, and I adored you, and I made you my wife. That's chapter 16. All those details are extremely important for you to develop, because here's where you have the wife whore language, where when she grows up and becomes fully developed, she starts becoming proud that she's beautiful. That's the language. Now, when I passed by you and I looked on you, behold, your time was a time of love, and I spread my skirt over you. That's covenant language saying, I will provide for you. That's what Ruth asked Boaz to do. Cover me with your skirt. And I spread my skirt over you and covered your nakedness. Yea, I swear unto you, enter into a covenant with you, said the Lord, and you became what? That's a husband-wife relationship. That's a husband-wife. Look at verse 9. I'm going to skip up in a minute. Then I washed you with water. Yea, I thoroughly washed away your blood from you, and I anointed you with oil. So now you are clean with the water of the washing of the word, and now you are anointed with the Holy Ghost. Right? Verse 10. And I clothed you also with broidered work. Now you're clothed in the righteousness of Christ. And I shod you with badger skin. Now you have the preparation of the gospel upon your feet. And I girded you about with fine linen. Now you are operating out of a priestly order, right along with the rest of the people of God. And I covered you with what? Eminent, beautiful, splendid woman, the word evades me. Verse 11. I decked thee also with ornaments, and I put a bracelet upon your hand and a chain on your neck. You see how God's describing how he has now grown her up and nurtured her, and now he's adorning her with beauty and splendor and opulence. Verse 12. And I put a jewel on your forehead, there it is, and earrings in your ears, and a beautiful crown upon your head. There she is, a beautiful, splendid queen, isn't she? Just absolutely gorgeous. Who is this describing? Jerusalem, Israel. Verse 13. You were decked with gold and silver, and your raiment was of fine linen and silk, broidered work. You did eat fine flour, honey, and oil, and you were exceedingly beautiful, and you did what? Prosper into a kingdom. So here you go. From a woman to a kingdom. From a woman to a kingdom, a city. That's your paradigm in Revelation 17, 18, and then 19 through 21. The bride becomes the holy New Jerusalem in Revelation 19 and 20. You prospered into a kingdom. Now watch this. Here we go. Verse 14. And your renown went forth among the heathen for your beauty. For it was perfect, but it was only perfect through my what? Right. In other words, the beauty of the believer is really the beauty of God in the believer. It's not the beauty of the believer originally or intrinsically. We have no beauty in ourselves. But she failed to realize that it was God who had cut the lights on. It was God who had given her her glory, which I had put upon thee, saith the Lord God. Verse 15. But you did trust in your own beauty. See it? And you played the harlot because of your what? Because you got famous. You tweeting, Instagramming. You getting hits everywhere on the internet. And you getting all kind of calls from all kind of dudes. And yet God was the one that gave you your glory. Now you done lost your mind, right? Because now all the attention is on you. Now, this is what I wanted you to get, that when God set Israel up in the land of Palestine, in Jerusalem, he set Israel up in the middle of all of the prosperity of the world. Y'all got that? The Mediterranean Sea on one side, the Tigris Sea on the other side, all of the ships got to pass through Palestine with all of its wealth and all of its populace. And so it gets to pass through with all of its gold and silver and precious things, all of the commodities on Google, all of the commodities on Amazon. All of that now is impressing all the people in Israel. Am I making some sense? And now that they are in the middle of the total trans-merchandising whole economic system of the world, they are becoming prosperous. They are becoming wealthy. They are becoming prominent because they can charge taxes. They can charge fees. They can interact now. They are exposed to the whole world. But what did God tell them to do? Remain separate. He didn't mean for the people not to come because God wanted to be glorified through them as the city of the living God. What he did not want that city to do was collapse into secularism, worldliness, carnality, and begin to integrate itself with the people of the world. He didn't want it to lose its what? Identity. Y'all following what I'm saying? And it did. Because of your renown. And you poured out your fornications, here it is, on everyone that passed by. Now, this is a husband who has watched with great detail what was going on. Isn't that the way God the Father is talking? He's watching with great detail everything that the leaders were doing. With great detail. Now watch verse 16. And of your garments you did take, and you decked thy high places with divers colors, and you played the harlot thereupon. The like things shall not come, neither shall it be so. God's protesting against that. Why is he saying that? Because you do know there should have never been high places. There never should have been these small little idol worship spots all over Jerusalem like you see in countries where Catholicism is. I've told you about that. Where you see the little shrines where devotion to saints have taken place. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Anybody travel the world know what I'm talking about? And Catholicism collapsed into this same abominable practice, only it did it with the saints. Pagans were doing it with all kinds of gods. Catholicism did it with the saints. Played the harlot thereupon. Shall not come, neither shall it be so. Now watch verse 17. I want you to get this. This is it. You also have taken your fair jewels and of my what? Whose gold was it? And of my what? Whose silver was it? Now watch this. Which I have given you, and here it is. You made to yourselves what? Images of men. There you go. God's giving you great detail on what's going on. Do you know what they did? They made images of Babylonian rulers, Syrian rulers, Egyptian rulers, the pagan gods, because all of the pagan kings, all of the pagan rulers had images of themselves. They were called what? Busts. Do you guys understand that? All of the pagan rulers had images of themselves. Egypt, the rulers in Egypt thought they were gods. Nebuchadnezzar thought he was a god. Belteshazzar thought he was a god. Xerxes certainly thought he was a god. Artaxerxes thought he was a god. Cyrus and the rest of them thought that they were gods, right? The Romans did the same thing. All of the Caesars had busts to their name. And in the time of national Israel, when Christ comes on the scene, guess what? The busts were put on coins. So the faces of the Caesars are now on the what? Coins. So now the people of the land are walking around with the idols where? Combined with their economy. You guys got that? Combined with their economy. This is where Jesus called them out in Matthew chapter 12 when they came to him talking about, so then who do we serve? Do we serve Caesar or do we serve God? He says, give me your coin. Remember that? He pulled out a coin. He says, whose inscription is this? That's the word for charagma. That's the stamp. Whose stamp is this? That's an image. And they said, it's Caesar. And then what did he say? Render unto Caesar what's Caesar's, and unto God what? What's God's. He knew that they had already paid allegiance to Caesar. Are you hearing me? Why? Because according to Hebrew law, the Jews should have never had coins with images of men as deities on them. So if I had time to pull up the coin images, I have 4 or 5 PowerPoints I had showed you on Sunday. They have images of coins for national Israel. The coins in national Israel were coins without images of men. It would be coins of images of wheat or of fig trees or of olive trees, different cultural impressions on the coin, which would have been their legitimate currency. But in the corruption of the heart of the rulers, when they did what I said they did at the time that they crucified Christ, we have no king but who? They were already admitting that they have received the what? Mark of the beast. Are you guys following me? The number of his name. There it is. So now I'm gonna walk through the four with them because I have time. I got 4 PowerPoints. Mark this. Recall the charagma, the Greek word for mark. That's the word mark in Revelation 13:16. It's the same word used to refer to the, what's the word there? Stamp. Stamp and mark. That's going to be my title this Sunday. The stamp of doom, or the seal of, I forget what the rest of the title is. You'll see it on Sunday. Anyhow, on the Roman currency. Pull up the next slide. I want to show you something. And by the way, okay, prior to the Jewish revolt in AD 66, the kings of the Jewish territories of Palestine and the Roman procurators who governed Judea, aided by the Jewish law, and minted coins, what? Without graven images on them. You guys got it? Without graven images. Here's what was going on. The Roman Empire believed in polytheism, and they did not mind people having their own gods. It's called pluralism. And when Israel was right with God, the rulers who were right with God, they could convince the Roman Empire that the coinage that they would use would be without images. That was a free right by Herod, a free right by the governors of Israel, because God had told them, no what? No images. But if you guys remember, the priesthood, the Pharisees were covetous, and they loved the power that came with identifying with the Roman Empire. You know what that means? They had no problem violating Torah when it came to the coins. That's when they started putting images of Caesar on the coin. Christ caught them. Show me your coin. He caught them. Notice what the next one says. So except for some coins minted during the reign of Pontius Pilate, now there you go, Pontius is the one who gave Jesus over, right? Some of those coins contain pagan religious symbols. The currency in Judea prior to the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70 was not offensive to Jews, though many of these coins were marked with Caesar's what? Name, as implied in Revelation 13:60. Got it? No one could buy or sell unless he had the mark, which is the name of the beast. Next PowerPoint. The coins below are a few coins minted in Judea prior to the fall of Jerusalem, which gives the reader a general idea of the appearance of these coins and the fact that they lacked what? Graven images of the emperor beast. This is what I was telling you. If you look at these graven images, they're all agricultural images. No male faces, no ruler faces at all. These are the coins that Israel legitimately used for commerce. The next one. Recent archaeological discoveries confirm the fact that the Roman money with the image of Caesar on it was present, watch this, and circulating in first century what? Well, we know it because Jesus said, give me a coin. He gets the coin whose inscription was on it. Right. Now, the next one. Furthermore, unlike the Roman procurators who were sympathetic to Jewish customs, Herod Agrippa, the first, Herod Agrippa, this is the one in the days after Jesus Christ, he killed Christ, Agrippa did, who was king of Judea from AD what? Sorry, that's Agrippa's son. He's the one in the book of Acts. From AD 41 to 44, issued many coins during his brief reign with the graven image of himself or Caesar, the beast, on them. So you see his face right there? That's Herod. That's the one in the book of Acts that God smote with worms because he allowed himself to be called a god. Do you remember that text? He got a coin, and guess who that is on that other coin is his son, King Agrippa II. This is 41-44. So King Agrippa II is the one that Paul is talking to in Acts 27 and 28. Remember when Paul talks to Agrippa, he's talking to the second Agrippa, not the first one that got killed in the earlier portions of the Acts. Okay. So now here's I think I got one more. Right. Not only did these Roman coins contain the name and graven images of Caesar imprinted on them, a violation of the law of Moses, many of these coins were even circulated to commemorate the Jewish what? Defeat during the war with Rome. Now here's the next, there should be another set. Here it is. It should have got turned the other way because the face on that first coin, that's Vespasian and Titus. Vespasian rose up after Nero. Vespasian is the one that destroyed the Roman Empire. Destroyed Jerusalem in AD 70, okay? He destroyed Jerusalem with his son Titus. They worshiped in the temple with big ensigns where 20,000 of the Jews who had joined the Roman Empire as mercenaries assisted them in destroying the temple. So says Josephus. These would be part of the second beast coming up out of the earth in Revelation chapter 13. You guys got that? With the horns like a lamb and mouth like a dragon, bringing a pseudo peace. Because see, Israel's destroyed now. So this emperor now is calling them to a peace treaty. But in order to have peace, they got to do what? They got to worship. So now, you see Vespasian right there? That's Vespasian. I wish the coin was turned. Do you see two men on that other coin with a tree in between them? You know what they are? Slaves. What kind of slaves are they? Jewish slaves. Why? Because once Vespasian Titus went in and demolished Israel, he took all the Jews and scattered them abroad and took many of them as slaves. These are the slaves of the beast who is forcing them to bow down and worship. You guys got that? These are the slaves of the beast who is forcing them to bow down and worship. Vespasian, 69 to 79 AD. Sestertius, Roman Mint, AD 71, AD 70. 1 year after destroying Israel, does Vespasian make a coin with his image on it, and on the back of that coin, so there's really two sides of one coin, okay? On the back side, he is glorying in the defeat of Israel. There it is. On the opposite side of the two Jewish slaves are the two Jewish slaves with an inscription signifying the defeat of Israel. How humiliating must that be for a coin to be circulating with Vespasian as a god on there? Because the term on there is Emperor Vespasian, like monarch of the world, or some kind of term like monarch of the world. And the cumulative geometria, numerical value for that has been argued by many of the theologians who do first century interpretation as the number for the 666. If that has any validity, I don't care about it really. What the Jews would have known and Christians would have known in that first century is that the destruction of the temple, the demolishing of the temple, and the scattering of the people of God was exactly what Christ meant in Matthew 24:15. When you see the abomination, make it desolate, flee to the mountains, get out of the way, because everything is coming down. And Israel now will be scattered to the four winds. They will be made slaves of the Roman Empire. And unfortunately, the vast majority of them won't mind, because they had already said what? We have no king but who? Right? So what you're seeing in the destruction of the temple in this language is going to be picked up in Revelation 17, repeating what we just read in Ezekiel 16. Read Ezekiel 16 and Ezekiel 17. I'm going to give you two verses in Ezekiel 16 to show you that the Egypto-Sodomite of Revelation chapter 11, verse 8, is here in the book of Ezekiel. So you're in Ezekiel 16, right? Look over at verse 26. Look at what it says in verse 26. You have also did what? Committed fornication with who? With the Egyptians. God will say that several times. Now, you're in Ezekiel 16, right? Go over to verse 49. Ezekiel 16:49. What does it say? Behold, this was the iniquity of your sister who? What was it? Pride, fullness of bread, and abundance of idleness was in her hand and in her daughters. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and the needy. What does that indicate? Covetousness. The wealth and opulence and prominence of national Israel operating under the sodomite terminology. So in verse 26, you got the Egyptian terminology. Over in verse 49, you got the what? Sodomite terminology. Look over in verse 55. Verse 55, when thy sister, what? Sodom, and her daughter shall return to the former estate, and Samaria, her daughter, shall return to their former estate. Then thou and your daughter shall return to their former estate. Verse 56, for your sister Sodom was not mentioned by mouth in the day of thy pride. And God goes on to continue to reproach them, calling them both Egypt and what? Sodom. Egypt and Sodom. That's the terminology that's used in Revelation chapter 11, verse 8. And it really describes the displeasure that God had with Israel because it sold itself out to the nations of the world. It brought into the temple images of the kings and rulers of the world. As far as God was concerned, national Israel was a what? A harlot. Y'all got that language? And that's going to become vividly clear in chapter 17. It is for this reason, from here on out, in the book of the Revelation, the judgments that are coming down upon those of whom the text explicitly says, those who received the mark of the beast and the number of his name. You guys got that? We'll pick that up on Friday and work through the last few of the plagues in Revelation chapter 16. And then we will be prepared for chapter 17 and 18. Thank you for your patience. Father, thank you for our class. Thank you for those of us who are working through your word to understand how clear you have already spoken, how patient you are with your rebel people, how patient you are with those who have been privileged to be brought near to you. Lord, we pray that the church in the 21st century would not altogether find itself in the same calamity as the church in the 7th century BC, 6th century BC, 5th century BC, 3rd century BC, and 1st century BC. We pray that we would not come up under the same calamities and find ourselves committing spiritual harlotry or spiritual adultery against you as well, so as to be indicted by your word. We pray that we would be found among those who are sealed, and therefore our minds are stayed on you. Those of us who have had engraven upon our right hands the word of the truth of the gospel, and therefore are committed to your glory, to your works, and that we would be part of the overcoming group who believe and who battle, who build, and who brave the opposition of this secular world system that is encroaching upon you and everything that brings glory to you. As we go our way, we're asking for traveling mercies. This we pray in Jesus' name, amen.